welcome to another video. Before we get started, we have a shout out today, so massive thank you to Alfred for subscribing. Before I get started, I wanted to pick out a few things to do with this video. So yesterday I spent over 2 hours trying to record this video. So what I'm going to do is split this video into 3. So this will be part of a series. I do realise that the sound quality in this is awful. I have no idea what was going on with my mic or my computer yesterday, seeing as I seem to sound fine now. So I do apologise about that. This video was suggested on Instagram by Erin Charlotte, so thank you so much for suggesting this video. If you have any video suggestions, if you want to help out with the channel in any way, there's currently a survey that I've posted to my Instagram and Twitter that you guys can get involved in. I'll pop the link to that in the comments box below. If you want to subscribe, because I'm not going to do that at the end of this video, if you want to shout out at the beginning of the next video, all you need to do is subscribe. If you hit the bell icon next to it, you'll get notified every time I post a video. And without any further ado, here is a look at the mark scheme for Section A, Paper 1. Okay, so this video is going to be a little bit different. Basically what we're going to do is have a look at the mark schemes for both Paper 1 and Paper 2. I might have to split this into 2 videos depending on just how long it is, so we'll see. One thing to mention before we get started is that I'm not an examiner, so basically you can apply to become an examiner of EduCAS for media studies or any board for any of the subjects that they offer. You do need to have some experience of teaching media or of the specification, so it is an option that's open to teachers. I have been thinking about becoming an examiner, and I was sort of midway through the process of becoming one when there was sort of a lot of personal things that happened, so I never got the chance to sort of continue with that. It is something that I'm looking at doing in the future, so this video might well be updated later on if I get that examiner training, and I will be updating or adding parts to the description box depending on if I get any feedback from examiners who follow me on some of my social media. So just be aware of that, and I'll pop any sort of notifications into the description box into my social media so that you can see if there are any additions that are made. I'm using the mark schemes from the sample assessment materials, which you can see here. These are the ones that are available to you online, and I think it's the easiest ones to work with because some of these you've already seen before in my questions videos. So I'm just going to show you how to get these from the exam board if you need them. I've also got sort of just a regular biro pen and also a highlighter so that you can see what I'm highlighting and we can pick out those bits together if that's a way that you think is sort of the best for you to work with. Okay, so to get to the sample assessment materials, which are the things that I'm going to be using to talk to you about the mark scheme, you get to these through the EduCAS website. Now this is something that you can access yourself. You don't need to be a teacher, you don't need to be working at school or anything like that to get to the website. There are certain things on there that you can get just as is. There are certain things on there that are protected, which means that only teachers or people who work in schools, like exams officers and things, the things that only they can get. So for instance, things like the briefs for your NEA or your coursework, I'm not allowed to discuss those on YouTube because they're all protected documents. There are a couple of extra paper, well there's one extra paper 1 and one extra paper 2 which are protected, so again I can't show you those, and they're things that your teachers can access and that they can get for you. So if your teachers need me to explain how to do that, then that's fine. Just send them to my videos or my Twitter or my Instagram or anything like that, and I'll help them out with that. So the easiest way of doing this is just to type in EduCAS Media Studies. There's the A-level and GCSE, so it's always worthwhile putting GCSE at the end of it. And the first link that comes up is the one that you need to head to. So we'll click on that and it'll take you to a page that looks like this. They've recently changed the website, so if you've been on the website before and you're not recognising what's on the screen here, it's because they've changed the look of it. So we'll just accept cookies. So you have already things that you can download and things that you can access. Things like these things here, this is nothing for you to worry about. Obviously, at the minute, none of these dates are, aside from the results day, none of these dates are things that are going ahead now anyway. But something like this, you don't need to really worry about. That's more for teachers. And then you've got the specifications. So if you want to know what your teachers are teaching you, what sort of things the board needs you to know, that's this document here. It is written for teachers, so there's no harm in you looking at it, but just bear that in mind. And then you've got sort of your past papers, resources, and the training and contacts again are for your teachers. There are resources that you guys can access, so the digital resources, books, key documents, that sort of thing. The online exam review is mainly for teachers. Key documents, again, mostly for teachers. The books are not fantastic, so I'll just show you what they are like. So these are the books that you can get for media studies. I personally don't find them very useful. The other book that you can get is down here, which is the revision. And I can do a video looking through both of these because I've got both of them myself. So I can do a video showing you these. If you think that would be useful, just let me know in the comments section below. I'm happy to do that. Let's get back to the website. So the digital resources, these are things that, as I said, you guys can access. So there's loads of resources on here. Some of them are really useful. Some of them are not so useful. I think the biggest thing on here that I use is the set products. Again, it's worthwhile remembering that a lot of these resources are written with teachers in mind. So the course planner, for example, this helps teachers to know how to plan their couple of years, or how long to plan your how to plan your GCSE in terms of what they study and when. The fact sheets, as I said, are fantastic. They are so useful, but again, bear in mind that they are written for teachers, not for students. So let's have a look then at the sample assessment materials, which are the things that I'm going to be looking at with you guys. If we go to key documents, here in the sample assessment materials, this is the stuff that you guys can access. So all you need to do is click on sample assessment materials and then the link underneath, and this will bring up what is quite a large document. As you can see, it's sort of 59 pages long. You don't need all of these, and the things that I am going to be going through with you are going to be certain pages from this, which I'll make clear in just a second. But to take you through, you have got a sample paper 1 here, with the questions and then the source. So you'll recognise these questions from this one I did for advertising, this one's I've done for magazines, and obviously we've looked at that for magazines in the questions as well. And then you've got the section B here, which I've used for film and also for the archers. Then we've got the mark scheme, and I'll be going through this with you. So if you want to highlight along with me, if you want to annotate along with me, you will need to print this little bit off. So from page 9 through until page 24. Then you have sample assessment 2. So this is a sample paper 2. Again, you've got the questions here. Worthwhile mentioning, it doesn't give you a clip here. Okay, so there's no mention of where the clip should be for that first section. And then you have the mark scheme here as well. So from page 28 through until page 42. So those are the ranges that you're going to need if you want to print those off and highlight along with me. Now's your time to do so. You can pause the video here and then you can start it up again once you've got all of those printed. If you have any questions about any of the bits of the website, if you want me to do a greater look at the Educast website, then just let me know in the comments below. Let's get back to annotating those mark schemes. So hopefully you've got your mark schemes printed off. So we'll read through these together and I'll be picking bits out as I think they're appropriate or as we go through. Okay, so this first page here is basically information prior to actually looking at either of the papers, and this is the same information whether you're looking at paper 1 or paper 2. So we'll only go through this once, but bear in mind that this is given to all examiners at the beginning of the paper, whether they're marking paper 1 or paper 2. So the first thing to comment on is this bit here, which is that marking should be positive. And basically what this means is that they are looking at giving marks rather than taking them away. So one of the ways that I like to explain this to my students for both English and media is to think that you're not starting off with 100% and they are gradually taking marks away from that 100%. You're starting off with 0, and basically anywhere that you can get a mark, they will give you a mark. So the examiners are always looking to give you marks, which is why if you don't write an answer to a question, you have thrown away your chance at getting marks. The examiners are not looking to take away or to penalise or to fail you. They're looking at rewarding you where possible. So marking should be positive, rewarding achievement rather than penalising failure or omissions. The awarding of marks must be directly related to the marking criteria. I don't know, I mean, I guess that's sort of, it seems really obvious to me. Basically what that means is that they can't just award marks subjectively. They have to be able to back up why they've given you particular marks. Just see if I can get my camera to focus a bit more. There we go. So they have to give, or there have to be justifications as to why they've given you the mark. Now, you won't have your teacher marking your paper. So if your teacher happens to be an examiner for EDUCAS, they will not be marking your paper. And all that they get, as far as I believe, and certainly if this is the case, I know this is the case with English, I'm not so sure whether this is the same for media, but I would imagine so. All they get from you is your candidate number and centre number. So they don't have your name, they don't know what school you go to, they won't have any prior information on you at all. So examiners should use the generic assessment grid and the indicative content for each question when assessing a candidate's response. I'll go through what each of those are when we get there because it'll be easier for you to see them. Examiners should use the full range of marks available to them. Okay, so this is really important. There's a lot of students who feel like, and maybe it's the case for teachers, I certainly know that it is a bit of a case for me in that some teachers will not give you certain marks. I know that I am quite reluctant to award a grade 9 in practice tests just because a grade 9 is like the top of the top. It goes to the top 2% of people in the entire country. So what they're saying here is that examiners shouldn't have that mindset. Examiners should be using the full range of marks, and if somebody qualifies for grade 9, then they should be awarded a grade 9. Band descriptors then. There's an assessment grid for each question, which is some of the things that you've seen on my videos before. When awarding a mark, examiners should select the band that most closely describes the quality of the work being assessed. So you give a mark to students based on how well they fit each grid. So basically, where you convincingly meet the descriptors, then you get the highest mark. Where you adequately meet the descriptors, you get a middle mark, and then where you just about meet those descriptors, you get the lowest mark, which again makes a lot of sense, and I'll show you how this will work when we get to those grids later on. If an answer demonstrates different aspects of different bands within the mark scheme, a best fit approach should be adopted to decide on the band, and then the candidate's response should be used to decide on the mark within the band. So that's a really waffly way of saying that basically it goes on best fit. If you have achieved, as you can see here, if a response is mainly band 2 but with a limited amount of band 3 content, you'd be placed in band 2, but it would be close to the top of band 2. as a result of the content that you've met in band 3. Indicative content then. So the mark scheme instructs examiners to reward valid alternatives where indicative content is suggested for an answer. Indicative content outlines some areas of the product or question that you might want to explore, but it is not a checklist for expected content or a model answer. So this will make more sense as we go through, and so I can show you them. But basically, any work that would get you a mark will be awarded a mark. This is something that the examiners are sort of being told that they have to use their, and you can see they have to use their professional judgment. If you prove that you have met the question, if you've answered the question, you will be rewarded for it. So where a candidate proves that a response that contains aspects or approaches is not included in the indicative content, examiners should use their professional judgment as media studies specialists to determine the validity of the response in light of the examples chosen and the questions asked. All questions provide opportunities for candidates to make formal, independent responses, and such opportunities need to be upheld in marking. Valid alternatives should be rewarded when deemed appropriate, in line with the skills set out in the banded levels of response to the generic assessment grids. This will make sense when you see the grids. Okay, so assessment objectives then. These assessment objectives are basically what you're being tested on. So any question that tests AO1, which you can see down here, is basically all of the questions. So question 2A, any question that's not 1 or 2B tests you for a part of AO1. So this is your knowledge and understanding of the theoretical framework for media, which are your key concepts. I'll just pop that down here, just in case we're not sure what they are. They're the key concepts, which include media language, industry, audience, and representation. And then contexts here. Okay, so you have to demonstrate your knowledge of all of these and contexts. Now that's split down into a little bit more detail here. So for question for assessment objective AO1 1A, which is demonstrate your knowledge of the theoretical framework, that's testing you in that section B, in the smaller questions. For AO1B, demonstrate your understanding of that framework. So this is basically recalling information, and this is being able to use that information. So for AO1B, that's the longer questions in the second half of the first paper. So that's the 3C and D and 4C and D here. For AO1-2A, so again splitting it down into further detail, demonstrate knowledge of contexts and their influence. That's basically just the context question in section A. And then demonstrate an understanding of context on the products and processes. That's your 2A. 2A, the context question in paper 1. So AO2 is a separate objective, analysing products and making judgments. That's all this longer question and how that media language is used. Any sort of how question, you're looking at making judgments. Okay, so you've got analysing media products using the theoretical framework, which is that first one here, and then making judgments is also in that second longer question here. Hopefully that makes sense. I mean, this is not something you necessarily need to know. It's useful to know what your assessment objectives are, but if you have been following the videos that I've been doing, and if you have been following what your teachers are saying, you will be doing this anyway. Okay, so the most important part of the paper for you guys to understand is this mark scheme here, okay, which is where we have the question up at the top, and then the grid, and after the grid we have what's called indicative content. Okay, the grid is the most useful part. The indicative content can go either way. Okay, it gives you ideas for what to include in your answers, but if you're marking a paper that you have already answered, then this is the bit you're going to want. Okay, so here we're looking at Quality Street and how it uses language to create meanings. We are given a maximum of 5 marks for each part. So you get 5 marks for images, 5 marks for language, 5 marks for layout and design. Okay. So there's not a lot of difference between each of these marks here. Obviously 0 marks in is going to be basically not writing anything. So as you can see here, no response attempted or no response that's worthy of credit. So if somebody's taken the mick on their exam paper, then that'll be it. Or if they've not answered it at all. And then as you move up these bands here, the difference is this sort of first word that we have here. So in band 1, in mark 1, you get this mark if you give minimal analysis of media language in the set product, or if your answer is brief and descriptive. But to move up to say like 3, which is sort of average, you suddenly have from minimal, satisfactory analysis and a general focus on connotations. So one of the huge differences between 0 marks and 3 or 5, or between 4 and 5, is basically the level of analysis you give or how much you write. If you only give a very, very minimal explanation, so if you're writing something that takes up 2 lines of that booklet when you've been given like 13 or 14, you're already limiting yourself. And that's what this first page of the mark scheme was talking about here. Marking positively means that the examiners are looking for that information. They're looking for that evidence. And if you're not writing enough, if you're not giving enough information because you're not writing enough, you're not analysing, you're not focusing on the connotations or whatever the question asks, then you're holding yourself back from getting marks. Okay, so you're never really losing marks on a paper, you're just not getting them, which is a really silly thing to do in an exam. Yeah, because as I said in my videos, everybody should be able to access this bit here. It might take some of you a little bit more work or a little bit more revision to get here, but there's nothing to stop you getting into this band. Okay, when the first point in the band is an excellent detailed analysis of media language, then everybody should be able to hit this. When the second point is a consistent focus on connotations or the intended meanings, you should be able to answer this. Okay, so this first question is really straightforward from my perspective. Okay, if you are finding any of these bits difficult, if you find that you are regularly getting a 2 or you're regularly getting 3 and you're just not moving up to 4 or 5, pop a comment in the comment section below and we can have a look together at how we can improve those answers. Okay, so that's the grid. The other half of the answer or the mark scheme is this indicative content here. Okay, so indicative content basically means what should be included. Now these are quite general, and the reason that they're general is because the examiners will credit anything that is valid. So if you have not mentioned something that is listed here, but it still talks about the images and what the intended meaning of those images were in the Quality Street advert, you would still get the marks. Okay, and that's what this bit means here, that the content is not prescriptive and all marks will be credited. Okay, so you're not expected to include all of these points. You're not going to be penalised if you don't mention these. Okay, but generally speaking, the indicative content are the obvious things that students are going to mention. Okay, now up in this section here, let's have a look at that together. Responses may include use of semiotic terms such as denotation and connotation. This use of terminology is not required to access the higher bands, and a semiotic approach may be incorporated within analysis of intended or suggested meanings created by specific aspects of media language. So you don't have to know particular terms to get into those higher bands. Obviously, these terms are useful anyway, but that's not going to hold you back. Responses in the higher bands, though, will explore media language and meaning in more detail, while those in the middle bands will be straightforward and those in the lower bands will be descriptive. So this is quite a useful statement here in that it tells you what you need to do really to get into that higher band. Okay, so if, as I said before, if you're finding that you're always in band 2, if you're always getting 2 or 3 marks for these 5-mark questions, have a look at how much detail, or compare what you are saying to this indicative content, because if you're just giving straightforward aspects, or if you're just giving a description, then you're stopping yourself from getting into those higher bands. Okay, so for images then, for the Quality Street advert, you're likely to be looking at things like the rich colour palette, the primary and secondary colours, the gold picture frame which connotes quality, wealth that's associated with the brand. So this bit here is a really good example of what we were talking about up here. If you've literally just written down that there is a gold picture frame, but you've not said that this suggests quality and linked that to the name, then you're stopping yourself from getting into those higher bands. Okay. Images might also include how the male character is central, how he's seated between 2 women, the formal clothing, the appearance of the male and what that suggests, visual contrast between the blonde and the dark-haired woman. For language, we're looking at persuasive techniques such as alliteration and hyperbole. So this is very, very similar to English. Now, we at my school study AQA English, so if you are also studying AQA English, this is basically a very similar question to Language Paper 1 question 2, where you have to comment on how an author has used language, okay? Because you've got the persuasive language here, the inference of the dilemma, the use of the phrase to anchor meanings, that's media based, but you know, similar, and use of descriptive language including positive adjectives. So very, very English based for that second question. And in fact, in the 2019 paper, they didn't write language, they wrote written text / language. So rather than thinking of media language here, which is what the whole question is based on, they're specifically asking you for the words and phrases that are used on the paper. Okay, and then layout and design. So responses are looking at things like the italicized font, colour purple, position of the gold frame, so historic imagery in the background, established brand, the seated characters in the foreground. Geometric composition of the advert leads the audience away from the male's face down to the frame tin of sweets. So that's looking at things like your rule of thirds, or the fact that the advert formed a sort of pyramid in that you'd got the sweets at the bottom, and then above that you'd got the characters, and above that you'd got Major Quality and Miss Sweetly. And then you've got the colour scheme between the wrappers of the products and the characters creates brand identity. And that's your first question. Okay, so question 2A. How social context influences magazines, referring to Pride magazine. So again, you need to be careful with your questions because your paper can cover multiple sources. We've gone from Quality Street to Pride here, so make sure you're commenting on the right text. That is one thing that will basically throw away marks. If you do not comment on the right text, then obviously you're not going to be down here. Okay, so here we're looking at a different aspect of that AO1. We've gone from AO11, 1A through to AO12, sorry, A01, yeah, 2A and 2B. So again, very similar to the first grid, no response, minimal knowledge, basic knowledge, satisfactory knowledge, good knowledge, excellent knowledge. So again, if you are not giving the right level of detail, if you're not giving, if you're not showing your knowledge, if you're not showing how much knowledge you have, then you're going to limit how far up here you get. This question I think is tricky, predominantly because of the way that the question is worded. So again, the way that I've started showing my students is basically to cover the question up, because a lot of what my students do is they take pride and then they only talk about pride, whereas the question is asking you, let's see if I can do this. There you go. How social context influence magazines. If this question was given to you on a paper, you would be able to understand and you would be able to access it and you'd know what to do. Whereas if all you are looking at is this second half, referring to pride to support your points, that's not a question. Yeah, I hope that makes sense. Like, when you cover this first bit up, refer to Pride magazine to support your points isn't a question. So we shouldn't just be focusing on pride. We shouldn't only be talking about pride. What we need to do is to think about how that social context influences magazines. So make a point about how it does that, and then use pride as an example. So hopefully this makes sense. Again, as we said, the level of knowledge is your first point. The second point is reference to pride. So although I've said you shouldn't make your answer all about pride, pride has got to be the question, that has got to be the text that you use to back up what you're saying. So if you don't make any reference to pride at all, you're not going to get any higher than here. If you make some reference to pride and some references to other magazines, you'll probably be here. If you make all of your examples based on pride, you'll be looking at getting up here, but only if you have also commented on the influence of social context. Hope that makes sense. Pop comments below if you need me to go through that in more detail. So the indicative content then, sorry, I have a really squeaky chair. Again, all points are valid and all should be credited. So this is, again, very similar to the bit that we saw for question 1. The only difference here is the knowledge of social context. So here's a really good example of making a point about magazines and backing it up in pride. So our point is, how do I cover this up? Okay. Bring on the watermelon notes. So here you go. Here's our point about magazines as a whole. Okay, so generally speaking, magazines are male dominated in the sense that either they are made by men or they are made for women but from the perspective of men. So how to be the perfect woman, how to look fantastic, how to spice up your love life, all that sort of stuff. So that's our point about magazines as a whole. To then get into that higher band by referencing pride, we've got here the emphasis on female appearance and stereotypical ideas of femininity in pride. So that there's a cover line in pride which is something like objectified, sexualized, mocked, which you could say is sort of subverting this traditionally male dominated approach to magazines. Okay, so we've got ideas of male dominance, issues of feminism or post-feminism, so the focus on issues such as FGM. Influence of multiculturalism in society, so the fact that pride focuses on issues that are relevant to black women, and the influence of celebrity culture, so the use of that female celebrity to sell pride. Okay, so this is the big one. It's the longest question on the paper, and it's also the one that takes the most space in this mark scheme, and I'll show you why in just a second. As you can see, it's not as simple as going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for your marks, because you're split now into bands where there are groups of marks together, and basically it's 5 marks at a time. Okay, so you first 5 marks are for band 1, second 5 marks are for band 2, etc., etc. So again, there are similarities to the other mark schemes that we've seen, the other grids that we've seen. The first point, again, is that level of analysis and the level of detail. So if you give minimal analysis, you're going to get minimal marks. If you give basic analysis, basic marks. Following that, you're looking at comparisons. So you need to have a satisfactory analysis of both the set and unseen. Down here it's or. Okay, so for band 1 it's or. For band 3 it's got to be and. So in order to get half marks, you've got to be talking about both pride and glamour. So if you're giving satisfactory analysis of both products, if you're commenting on obvious aspects of representation, you're probably going to be in this band. The next step is that you're giving comparisons between them, but probably focusing on one of the products more. Satisfactory use of theoretical framework, particularly representation, and generally appropriate use of terminology. Okay, so you're gradually increasing your marks based on what you include. If you include a detailed explanation, analysis, if you include a detailed analysis, if you comment on both products equally, if you reference different parts of the theoretical framework or your key concepts, if you mention terminology, if you talk about theorists, then you are jumping from here to here. And the only other point then that differentiates you between this band and this band, aside from your theorists, is your judgments. Okay, so you have to comment on how far the representation is similar or different, which is a bit sneaky of the exam board, if I'm being honest, because the question here, the whole overall question, doesn't ask for a how far response. You've really got to be reading those bullet points to realise that you need that judgment in there somewhere. Okay, so if this was me, I would make sure that I bookend my answer. I start off with a how far answer and I end with a how far answer. So my first paragraph and last paragraph are going to give me my judgments. You'll be doing judgments all the way through anyway, but just to make it really obvious to the examiner, I would do a how far at the beginning and a how far at the end. Okay, hopefully that makes sense, just so that it's really obvious what you should be including. Okay, you're looking at the level of analysis first, you're looking at the comparisons between both products, you're looking at your key concepts, your terminology, your theory, and then your judgments. Those are the things that are going to determine whether you are here or whether you're up here. Okay, so I hope that makes a little bit more sense. Again, if you've written an answer to a question like this, use this bit to help you mark it. Once you've thought about whereabouts you are, or if you've received a mark back and you're only on 15 and you're predicted to be somewhere up here, then use the indicative content to help you. Now the indicative content is massive. As you can see, it goes on for like 2 pages. Okay, so there is more here for us to think about, which we'll go through together. Okay, so again we have this statement that the content is not prescriptive, all points will be credited. Okay, to get into the higher bands, which is basically bands 4 and 5, you have to be giving complex aspects of representation. Okay, so I'll point out as we go through here what the complex aspects are. Okay, middle bands more straightforward, those in lower bands is descriptive. For marks in band 3 or above, you have to include comparisons between both products. You can't just focus on one. Okay, it's not expected that these will be equally, but the more even you are, the higher up the bands you'll be. Okay, band 3, you may only have one product, or you may only be analysing one product. That's fine, they understand that. You are required to make judgments and draw conclusions, okay, which is what we've said before, and it's that sort of how far statement. It's acceptable for responses to conclude on the representations are either similar or different, provided that they are justified through the analysis of the products. Okay, so you can't just say overall they're the same, overall they're different. You've got to justify your answers. Okay, this bit is really important. Okay, so it's an extended response question. In order to achieve the highest marks, you've got to construct and develop a sustained line of reasoning, which is coherent, relevant, substantiated, and logically structured. If you are only writing a paragraph, you are not doing this, and therefore your marks are going to be really far down that mark scheme. Remember that the examiners are looking to give you marks. They want to give you marks. That's their job. Their job is to be positive and to award you where you've done something well. So don't limit yourself by only writing like that much for a 25-mark question. Use the marks to help you. A 5-mark question is going to be like this much, so a 25-mark question has got to be bigger than that, hasn't it? Okay. All right, let's have a look at the things that you could be including then. So responses are likely to use aspects of representation from the theoretical framework, so the selected, constructed and mediated nature of representations. This would be a complex comment if you referred to Stuart Hall's theory, which is part of this. Stereotypes and misrepresentations of women, that's a simplistic comment. Messages, values and points of view inherent in representations of women. Theoretical perspectives on representation, so feminist approaches, notions of selection, construction, mediation, that's more complex. Okay, so in fact this is not how an examiner would do it, but to help you guys understand the difference between complex ideas and straightforward. So that's complex, that's straightforward, that's straightforward, that's complex. Okay, so I'll do this throughout. Some of these need qualifying, so this would be complex if you referred to the theorist. This is straightforward, but you can go into more complex ideas the deeper you analyse. Analyse each media product in terms of the choices made by the producers to construct their representations, including choice of cover model, straightforward, shot size and type, straightforward, titles and cell lines, content, language and mode of address, straightforward. I mean, these would be complex depending on how deep you go into them, but just saying that the model on Glamour is stereotypically attractive, she's dressed in feminine colours with more relaxed posture and hair, like that's straightforward. Commenting on the fact that it's a long shot in the centre of the page is straightforward. Saying that there's direct mode of address by both women in the front covers, that's straightforward. But if you were to say something like the long shot of Naomi Harris has dominant posture because she's got her hand on her hip, which conveys ideas of strength, which links to the idea of being proud of who you are. That's going into a more complex analysis. Key similarities between how women are represented in the two magazine covers. So, representations of stereotypical femininity in both covers created through selection of image, including choice of female celebrities and the focus on their visual image, clothing, hairstyle, makeup, jewellery, elegant and flowing dresses, flawless skin. Okay, that's straightforward. Construction, use of medium long shot in a straight on angle to emphasise both women's slim figures, create an openness and appeal to the audience. Straightforward to complex. The majority of this is straightforward. Creating a sense of openness and appeal to the audience, that's more complex. Mediation, inclusive mode of address, pose, smile, eye contact with reader, use of first person quotation on the glamour cover, we in the cell line of the pride cover, that's more complex. Emphasis on stereotypically female interests and concerns such as beauty and fashion in the cell lines, that is more complex, I think. Again, a lot of these need qualifying, but that's basically what we're looking at here. Analyze key differences between how women are represented in the two magazine covers. For example, the representation of a black celebrity on the Pride front cover and a white celebrity on the Glamour front cover, that's straightforward. More politicised or feminist representation of women on the Pride front cover, created through explicit reference to feminism and focus on gender issues such as female objectification in the cell lines, complex. Representation of issues specifically relevant to black women in the Pride front cover, such as FGM and black women's bodies examined. Straightforward to complex. If you are just pointing these out, it's straightforward. If you're commenting on how that links to the representation of women, it's more complex. Different, more political connotations of the title Pride, which suggests a celebration of black beauty in response to the underrepresentation of black women in mainstream women's magazines, compared with the connotations of the title Glamour, which suggest a focus on stereotypically female concerns such as appearance, typical of women's magazines, more generally complex. Linking of these differences to the respective target audiences for each magazine, such as more niche or specialist audience of black British women for Pride, mainstream audience of white women for Glamour, straightforward. Make judgments and draw conclusions regarding how far the representation of women in the two magazine covers is similar and different. Okay, so this paragraph here, this part of the indicative content, is looking at your judgments, how far they are similar or different. Okay, so these are the sort of things that you could comment on. So although the magazines differ in their representation of ethnicity, the women are largely represented the same. Or although the magazines are aimed at different audiences, the representation of women is largely similar. Although there are some similarities in the representation of women, Pride focuses on more serious issues related to gender and ethnicity than Glamour. What's interesting to note here is that it doesn't matter which way you justify it. So the fact that the indicative content talks about how the representation of women is similar twice suggests that that's going to be the route that most students go down. However, if you are arguing that yes, there are similarities, but the differences are what's most important, that would be credited as well. Okay, so you can justify it either way. You can make that judgment either way, and you would still be given the marks accordingly.